tent poles of whether India succeeds at the speed at which the government hopes for or not is the level of enthusiasm in private companies when it comes to fresh investments. Naina Lal Kidwai ji, your sense of the level of interest in India to go out and invest in the India story away from the words when it comes to actual implementation and actually opening their purse strings?
So there is no doubt in my mind that India as a growth economy is attracting interest. There are very few economies, it goes without saying, that are growing at the rate we are. And because of that, India is and will attract attention. We also know that because of the China Plus One as not necessarily an alternative, but an addition to China as a global supplier, India will and continues to be looked at. I believe that if we are to look at what we are doing here, and logistics figured very high in the interim budget. Logistics has been a bone of contention for many of the investors here because of the costs it takes to move goods through our country. This has rapidly been coming down, and the continued focus, whether on rail, road, and transportation, and the productivity that happens with that logistic investment, the interim budget furthers that mission, is only making India more attractive and taking care of some of the bones of contention that have existed in the past, namely productivity.
Do you see this actually come down, Dr. Garg? Logistic costs which could make India more competitive?
Of course, logistics is extremely important for the mercantile economy.
Are logistic costs coming down at the speed at which they should?
We don't have good data to support it. There's been a recent paper which has been put out by the government side that our actual logistics costs were not around 12%, which was claimed earlier. It's about 8 to 9%. But that has to be seen in the context. What do you define as part of the logistics? What is coming down? Where at this moment, to my mind, we are more doing the logistics building up through Gati Shakti, otherwise the multimodal. So that part, we have to make this or that investment into the transportation, storage, warehouse and other kind of things. That part is going on. It will take some time and ultimately the cost should come down.
Okay. Naina Lal Kidwai, as far as government capital expenditure is concerned, it's 11% up. Were you assuaged by the fact that the finance minister didn't really go out on a reckless populist spree, given the fact that this was election year, elections being announced just in a few weeks from now? That would have been a big concern for anyone, really.
I think it was, Rahul, and I thought that, that it would be hard for them to even stick with the 5.3, although I think there was speculation that they might even try 5.2. But to come in at 5.1% commitment in an election year has to be lauded as responsible behavior. They could have easily got away with the 5.3 they had earlier committed, and economists and others would have been comfortable with that. So what we're seeing here is fiscal profligacy being contained. The desire to chuck a lot of money at people has not indeed played out. And instead, what we're seeing is building blocks for development. And I do think that emphasis on the women programs, bringing forth the successes of the self-help group movement, which is truly amazing. 83 lakh self-help groups, 9 crore women beneficiaries, continued focus in that area. These are the sort of building blocks as we go forward that enable economic engagement of women at the rural level in the growth of the country. And it's a very important building block. And likewise, youth and startups, there's been a lot of focus there in both in terms of the new fund which has been announced, which I think is much needed. We have struggled with local venture capital type of money. We've relied too much on money that has come from abroad. And to provide this funding, which is interest-free, can be up to 50 years for startups in the more sort of futuristic sectors, is really very, very welcome. And I think is another indication of the commitment that India is making to the startup ecosystem.
Dr. Garg, how do you respond to the criticism from the likes of Mr. Chidambaram and the others that the manner in which the fiscal deficit is being kept under check is actually by spending much lesser than what the budget estimates were? That the announcement was for higher spends on capex or on social sector schemes, but the actual spends were lesser, and that's how the fiscal deficit appears to look under control.
No, the fiscal deficit reduction for the current year is not very much. It was 5.9, it is 5.8 now. And if you go into the further numbers, it's actually 5.84, very close. If you done it, it would have been 5.9. So that's not much control. But what perhaps he was referring to, that the capex, which was suggested to be about 10 lakh crores, has come down by 50,000 crores. But there is also reduction on the revenue side for the next year. Actually, that is where what surprises me, in fact, is that the revenue expenditure is not gone up to the extent of even what the interest expenditures are going. So interest is going up by about 1.5 lakh crores, but revenue is going up only by 1.1 crore. So there is squeeze on the revenue expenditure as well. So, but you are in a very difficult situation because you're already at very high fiscal deficit situation. So whichever way you can bring, by raising revenues or containing the revenue expenditure or not expanding the fiscal, the capital expenditure that much like it was done in a couple of last 3 years. I think that's fine. It's not by sort of not expanding. I don't think government would have loved to save 50,000. Perhaps it was not able to spend, that's why it is there.
Okay, sure. That's also something to look at more from a practical side. It's not like they're trying to scrounge money, it's just that maybe they tried to spend but couldn't.